Hi everybody. My name's Dalen, and this is my attempt at telling a little bit of my story. The goal for me is now to help people. I struggled for 19 years with a lot of things. A lot of things were thrown at me, and I didn't talk about them to a lot of people. Some things I didn't talk about with anyone. And the last 5 years, like, just to give you some context, the last 5 years have been an enormous period of growth for me. And right now I'm in one of the best places I've ever been. And I want to give back to, all the people that have helped me. And I want to pay it forward to all the people who are struggling right now and in the future with things they don't want to talk about and things they are afraid to be judged by. And my goal today is to overcome a lot of the fear of my own judgment of myself and what I thought others would think of me. Because it's not about me right now. It's about helping the people that need to hear this message. So to begin with my story, it really goes back to 1996. I was 6 years old. Just woke up, middle of summer, August 12th, 1996. And I came downstairs to my mom, my dad, and my sister all standing in the kitchen waiting for me. And my father looked at me and more or less said that he wasn't gonna be around the rest of the night or the rest of the day and night. Probably wasn't gonna see us until the morning. And told us he was heading out. And that it's not an abnormal thing, but I knew something was wrong. I knew that when I looked at him and I heard what the words that he was saying, that his actions and his body language were not telling me that message. That everything that he was saying was not right. It wasn't the truth. I knew that he wasn't telling the truth, and I knew he wasn't coming back. And the real moment of clarity never hit me until afterwards, but I just acted on that instinct. At 6 years old, you have much less of an opportunity, or much less fear, I should say, of making an outburst, and I didn't have that fear then. So I immediately started crying, and I grabbed him by his leg and told him not to leave. And I vividly remember, clutching onto his leg for dear life because I knew he wasn't coming back. And I think that was hard for me, because after he left, I still remember that moment. I still remember looking out the window and watching him drive off. I watched him walk away and I watched him drive off, and the next morning I was told that my dad had committed suicide. And I was told a number of other things, like the fact that he was an alcoholic, the fact that he had abused drugs, he was severely depressed, he was potentially about to get diagnosed with bipolar disorder. All of these difficult things to really grasp as a 6-year-old, I was told back then, and I'm thankful for it. But it brought me to this really deep point of not understanding why, right? Like, because I sat in front of him crying and holding on to him, telling him not to leave, and he, in my heart, told me the last lie he was ever going to say. He told me that he loved me and he was coming back. the next day, and he didn't. And that really crescendoed into this, this deep anger that burned for a long time throughout my childhood. But I couldn't express that because I didn't know how to express like the idea that I knew that he wasn't coming back. There's just no words to explain the intensity of that emotion, and the idea of trying to explain that to someone else was at the time just overwhelming. So I held it in. But after his death and moving past that event and the trouble that I faced in the immediate aftermath, I took stock of the truths that I did know, and what I did understand was that alcohol, drugs, tobacco, the depression, all of it really broke him, and that's what I understood. So in the aftermath of that moment, I took steps to not become him. I did not want to become my father, so I made principles. I made 4 principles. I would not drink alcohol ever, and I would not touch tobacco. I wouldn't touch drugs. And then the 4th one was I would not commit suicide. And the first 3 were probably the easiest rules I've ever had to follow. With the 3rd being, drugs. I've taken prescription drugs for specific uses. I've never abused them in any way. But the 4th one, suicide, was considerably harder for me because of the nature of how my father committed suicide and what, that experience, how I held on to that experience. And being struck by a moment like that as a 6-year-old boy, your father is everything to you, right? Like, your father represents all of the hopes and dreams and, the future of what you can be. And when that gets taken away from you, it's nothing short of completely and utterly devastating. And it there's something inside you that just gets absolutely destroyed. And the obsession of suicide afterwards is incredible. And at 7 and 8 years old, all I could remember was that moment that he left. And I would have nightmares, and I would relive that every single day. And I would wake up. My nightmares would wake me up every early morning, 2, 3 o'clock, sometimes even 1 o'clock. And I would, that's what I would wake up to is that nightmare. And after a while, honestly, like, my body would stop itself from dreaming, so it would just wake me up before I ever hit REM cycle. So I, for most of my childhood, I didn't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours in a row, and that became my normal. And if that was all, that might have been easier to overcome. But moving forward with my life, the next man that came into my life as some kind of father figure was a disciplinarian. And this was absolutely no fault to my mother. She had no clue that he was doing this to me. But anything that I would do wrong, he would beat me to, from the backs of my knees to the small of my back with a real thick Western leather belt. And I learned pain. Not just like the intimacy of physical pain, but the idea of how to hide pain. Because it almost felt like there was some kind of satisfaction that would come from that for him, and I hated that. there was such a hateful, that hate was still burning in me for what my father did to me, and that just transferred over to, how, I remember, like, I couldn't tell you what the date was, but I remember the moment that I said, fuck this. I'm not going to let him see me cry. And I remember just silence. He would hit me and I would be silent, and there was nothing that came out of me. And I think in that moment he started to hit me harder, because he wanted the reaction, and I stopped. I didn't let him have it. I would cry in my room. I would hide it from him. I would listen to what he said, but I did not give him the satisfaction of what he wanted. And it always brings me back to like the Clint Eastwood quote from Heartbreak Ridge of, don't give the prick the satisfaction. And that's where I really found this comfort in being completely uncomfortable with my situation, right? I was struggling mentally, and every day I was obsessing about like the worst of the worst, suicide, killing myself, thinking about my dad. And at the same time, like, I would struggle physically, right? Like, I'd go to school some days after he would beat me and couldn't sit down right. Like, I'd be sitting on the side of my butt, because if I actually sat on my butt or my legs, it was just like, it's just so painful. And from 6 to 14, right before high school, it was just like a very emotionally depressed time. I was silent. I was reserved. I didn't make friends very often. I wouldn't sleep very often, and it was just a constant. Every day was a struggle. It was a legitimate struggle every day to just live, right? And I got to high school, and I more or less started to make friends. Even being quiet, because it's just that kind of environment. Like you end up making friends regardless. And I was small, and I was tall, but I was small, and I remember getting bullied for being skinny. And it didn't make a major impact on my life, but it did, because at the time I was just struggling so deeply inside that it just didn't matter what people said to me. I was far harsher on myself than anyone else ever could be. So with that being said, it was just a constant struggle through my life to really learn how to handle other people. I would observe, I would watch, I would listen, and everything. It was just, there was so much struggle inside that I already knew more or less when I talked to people. The very few times that I did talk to people, I already knew what was going on with them. Pain recognizes pain, struggle recognizes struggle, and it wasn't really until after high school where I really started to learn how to interact with people. But throughout high school, I was still depressed. I was still suicidal. I still struggled every single day with that fact. And what that brought me to is, it brought me back to those 4 principles of, the last one, I wouldn't commit suicide. And I held to that. But what that brought me to was, I wanted to die, and I didn't know how else to do it. I knew that I wasn't going to do it myself, because I wasn't going to give any I wasn't going to break my rules. But I also wanted to die, so I chose the military. Outwardly, I told people that it was because of 9/11, because I did watch that, and in some way there was a sense of duty for me to join. This was back in 2008. But the real reason was I wanted to die. And that was the most selfish thing that I could choose. But I wasn't going to tell people that. And I went to basic training. You know, I chose National Guard, and you know, I missed out on a deployment by about a month. I didn't end up going to Iraq. And then after I missed out on Iraq, I was volunteering for every deployment up until about 2011. Then I was finally able to jump on the 82nd ADT deployment, and I went to Afghanistan, Kunar province, Afghanistan of all places. And I began to, you know, I was infantry, so I was security for an agribusiness development team, and more or less like unit got moved around. It was like constant change, and eventually it came down to like half the unit left. I volunteered to stay because I just wasn't ready, and I stayed. So I stayed for the full 11 months that the most you could. But that deployment was very, very difficult. There was a lot of isolation. There was a lot of traumatic events that I saw. I wasn't engaged in combat, but I saw the effects of it. I ran the flight line for a while, and I saw a lot of casualties come off birds, and it isn't what a lot of other incredibly courageous men have done and seen, but what it did teach me was kind of understanding the value of life, and it kind of kept me going for a little bit longer. It was the place where I saw my first American casualty, really understanding like what death really does look like, because I didn't see my father die. And when I saw that, I saw the first casualty I saw was Staff Sergeant Christopher Brown, who passed away around like April 3rd. It was about a week after we got there, and it was an incredibly intense moment. I still remember saluting the helicopter as it flew away into the darkness. And he was a triple amputee with a wife and 3 kids, and it really hits home, right? Like when you first get into country and you really realize like that could happen to me, and not only that, but it can happen to other people around you. It tightens everything up. You stop thinking about yourself and you start thinking about like, I have a job to do, and if I don't do my job right, like that could happen to us. And while I was busy, right, I kept myself busy for 22 hours a day in Afghanistan, and just kept fighting through everything that I had to fight through. I worked constantly, and I always kept, Sergeant Brown in the back of my head, thinking about like, I cannot allow myself to let other people down. And that's what I focused on. So I just kept myself busy. I was completely isolated for a long time though. I had a very, very lonely job, and I would do my work alone, on purpose. I would try and stay away from people, and I would just really focus on being isolated. And that didn't help. And as I returned home, it really showed the issues in that. As I came home, and no kidding, like 3 days later, I was at a jiu-jitsu class that I was teaching, because I had taught there before, and started teaching, and like no kidding, like the first 5 minutes, the first guy, he was brand new to the gym, came in and stood up in my guard, pulled my knee, and fell back for an ankle lock and tore my ACL. My knee completely dislocated. The pop was so loud that like every single person in the gym kind of like stopped everything and looked over at us. And like, it was that moment where I was like, my life just changed instantly. And it did. Like, my ACL was completely torn, and within a week and a half, I was sent back to Camp Atterbury, and then they sent me to Fort Knox to recover. And they were telling me it was going to be a minimum of about a year of recovery in Fort Knox with no friends, pretty much completely isolated from, 500 miles from home, unable to really progress in my career and all that. And that was brutal. That was devastating. It was almost as devastating to me, as it was when my father killed himself, because it was just like this idea that I couldn't keep myself busy anymore with the one thing that was actually keeping me moving forward. Because the Army had literally kind of transformed myself into like, I've got a direction. I didn't have a vision of where I wanted to go with it. I just knew that I could help people in whatever way I could through the Army, and that was it. That's all that kept me moving forward. So when I tore my ACL, I went through this 2 weeks of just like a deep introspective despair, and depression, and I was completely devastated. And then one day I was forced to go to this mental management class. I don't remember what the guy's name was, but he more or less told us about like cognitive behavior therapy. He didn't really explain it as that. He just kind of explained the process. And he told us to like think of like a catchphrase that we could use to remind us of something that mattered to us, like something that really connected to us. He said like you should always write down whatever those words are that connect to you, and read them every day. And so what I did was I wrote down this quote from Batman Begins, as spoken by Liam Neeson. It was, if you make yourself more than just a man, if you devote yourself to an ideal, then you become something more entirely, a legend. And that at the time just really hit me. Like every time I heard it, it was just like tears, right? Like hit me in the feels every single time. And I posted that. I taped a big sheet of paper on my mirror, like right next to head height, and I read that every single day. Not just every single day, but because I was in Fort Knox, I was completely isolated. I was alone in my room. I was sleeping maybe 45 minutes to an hour a night. So I read it at least every hour. I mean, it was 23 hours a day where I was like, I need to read that quote because I need to keep going. And, I would remind myself of that quote, and I was just constantly thinking about continuing on, just moving forward. And it took me a long time to really, or it took me 2 or 3 weeks after that to really overcome like the devastation of what my knee injury really meant. It wasn't that bad, right? Like I had to see a lot of guys struggle through the injuries that they faced from Afghanistan to really understand, like, I'm not in that bad of shape. Like that guy lost an arm and a leg. This guy lost, he broke his back and he broke his knee, severe traumatic brain injury, and mine's not that bad. What I've been through is not that bad compared to what these guys have lost. And I had to come to terms with that. And when I did, when I really started focusing on developing that message I was building in my head, I blossomed, right? Like I started actually driving towards what I wanted. And what I wanted was to get out of Fort Knox. I wanted to be physically fit enough to continue in the military, and that's what I did. A year-long recovery, I cut it down to 7 months. I was out of Fort Knox and home in 7 months. And I went back to college and started a new degree in sociology, and I started to learn about people because it started to become more of like this idea that I really wanted to understand how people work. I wanted to understand how I worked and why I was the way I was. And that's what I did. And after a few years, like it was, I tore my left ACL right after I got home from Afghanistan. A year later, I tore my right ACL. A year later, I tore my right ACL again and went through another knee reconstruction. So throughout that time in school, I stopped focusing on physical, on my body, right? I would recover, but for the most part, I really doubled down on intelligence and really fixing who I was. After my relationship with my partner at the time of undergoing all of these injuries, our relationship really struggled, mostly because of me, and wanting to develop myself and learn how to overcome the things that I had been through in my life. And she had helped me in many ways, but there were so many ways that she couldn't help me with. That as we grew apart and we broke up, the month following that breakup turned into a deep internal struggle with me, and this feeling of being a burden and just a waste of a life is where I really took it. And it found me in a very dark place, to the point where I came home from school, from Whitewater, just breaking down all the way home, crying my way, to the point where I was sobbing, to the point that I could barely see the road in front of me. Come home and contemplated the life I was living, and whether it was worth it. And I fell to the point of sitting on my mother's hallway with a Glock 34 in my hand, one round in the chamber, just ready to end my life. And it was the single deepest moment in my life where I felt like I actually connected with my father. I felt like all of the feelings that I was having was truly coming forth from what he had felt. Where all of the pain and the struggle that he had went through and undergone showed me the face of his choice. And I swear I put the gun to my head and I pulled every ounce of the trigger save one. And I still don't know what held my hand that day. I don't know what stopped me. But I put it down, and I broke in that moment. Everything overwhelmed me. But in the aftermath was complete clarity. Seeing what my father must have gone through really changed my perspective, even more than it already had. And because of that, I took the next 2 to 3 days to really deeply dive into my introspective mindset and begin to understand why I chose what I chose. Why did I, what parts of my life brought me to this point? Not just the moments, right? Not just my father killing himself and the beatings that I got and the bullying and the war, not all of that, but the day-to-day interactions that brought me here. Why am I here? I've always been a why person, and that why really is really always what I've sought to understand, which is why I went into sociology to begin with. But it became this obsession in those 2 to 3 days of understanding what it was, what specifically, because there had to be at least one thing that brought me there. And what I came to understand was the idea that I had never told anyone that I wanted to die. Not once in my life had I ever let it slip. For 19 years, from the day my dad died to when I put that gun in my head, I had never told anybody that I wanted to die. And it was powerful. It was intense. It was this idea that nobody even knew. I had become such a good actor at hiding all of the pain and the struggle and the war that was raging within myself, the hell that I had gone through and the hell that I had put upon myself, that nobody had a clue, right? People had ideas. People saw my struggle, right? I didn't hide it 100% of the time, but they, there's a difference between knowing someone is struggling and asking them, and them telling you, right? You might know, but that doesn't mean they're, you might know when you talk to them and tell them you're there for them. And I had that happen many times in my life, but that doesn't mean that I was ready to talk about it. And for 19 years, I wasn't ready to talk about it. I wasn't ready to express that part of myself. And what I realized is that all of that courage that I might have was worth nothing if I didn't have the courage to step forward and talk about it. And that's what I did. I started with my friend Chris and Carrie together. I talked to them about what had happened and what I'd gone through. And I think we both, or all three of us, both of them really grew closer to me because of that. And then I moved on to telling my sister who her incredible empathy throughout most of my life really is what probably saved me from making that choice sooner. I still remember moments where she would sit outside the bathroom door and listen to me break down because I had locked the door and just fell apart. But she was always there, and I can't thank her enough for being the incredibly important person that was given that opportunity to help me. And even if she wasn't the one that, changed my mind, she was still part of the process that I needed to have. And I'm incredibly thankful for her. But then it came down to having one of the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life, and that was just telling the one person that I feared to tell because she had already gone through something like this before. And that was my mother. My mother is the most incredible person I've ever met in my life. And telling her, a woman who lost her husband to suicide, that her son almost committed suicide 3 days ago, was probably one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had to have. And I didn't make it through without crying. I cried before it happened, I cried during it, and I cried after. But it was the most important conversation I've ever had, and I probably will ever have in my life, because it made me understand the truth about myself that I needed to be accountable, that I needed to follow through with the integrity that I shared in every other form of my life, but not within myself. I needed to do the right thing for myself, and I wasn't doing that for 19 years. But I was willing to do it for everyone else and everything else in my life. And with my mother's help that day, with her listening and just understanding what happened, with me having the courage to step forward and expose that side of me, and her empathy to take it and not judge me for it, was exactly what I needed to change. And I am incredibly thankful for the family and the friends that I've had throughout the years that have been there for me, the empathy that I've seen within my life. I'm thankful for the struggle that I've been through, the pain that I suffered, all of it. I'm thankful. I'm incredibly grateful. And that's why I'm doing this. Excuse me. I'm doing this because someone else needs to hear this. I'm doing this for you, not for me. I don't need the validation anymore. I never have, really. I needed to do this for me 5 years ago. But now I am happy with myself. This emotion that I'm feeling is just the passion I have for helping others. And what that means is that I am stepping forward into the story that I have, and I'm giving back. I'm paying forward all of the empathy and the love, the kindness that I've been shown throughout my life. I'm giving all of the knowledge and the processes, the mentors and the people that I've watched. I'm giving all that away so that one person can take this story and live. And that's it. That's all. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm doing. My book is focused on the same thing. It's probably going to be much better worded than this video is, because I've always been excuse me, I've always been a much better writer than I have been a speaker. But I think that's going to change with time. But my book will, right now my book is in the process of writing. I've got just about 7 chapters written. I want to write about 9 to 10 chapters. Really complete my ideas about what has really brought my life together and brought it to this point where I feel mentally invincible. Right now I think I could get through absolutely anything in life. I obviously hope I don't have to, but I know I could, because I've already been through the hardest things that I'll ever have to go through. And my book is my legacy for other people to use. So at this point, I'm looking to just expose my message, give this message to other people, and really help people. So if this video hits you in any way, share it. That's all I can ask. I don't expect it from anyone. But if you feel something because of this, please share it. Comment what you liked most. Tell me what you don't like. If you don't like me sharing my message, go ahead. I will listen. If there's anything you want me to go deeper into, I will gladly. Just talk to me. If you're struggling, contact me. Ask me anything. Tell me anything. That is why I created this, and that is what I'm here for. So I want to thank you if you watched the whole video. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.